So good evening, everyone. It is indeed a pleasure to be with you once again. This will be a little smaller group because it's August and it seems that a lot of people are away on vacation. I actually contemplated not doing a webinar this month for the very reason, but was urged to go ahead and do it. So we are doing it, and I'm glad that we are. The weather here in Fairfield is actually quite mild right now, and so we're relaxing and being very, very happy and comfortable in our good weather. Tonight's topic, placebo, who cares, has come up many times in my work because people often come, or at least approach me, with considerable doubt about this form of bringing about a kind of change that they're looking for in their lives, whatever that change might be. Maybe they're ill and they need to get healthy again, or they're feeling stressed out or anxious or sad or whatever it might be that they would like to change, or there's something in their relationships or their home environment, whatever it might be that they want to change. And oftentimes they're really kind of uncertain, and they ask typical questions, I'd say, in most cases, about what is going on when I do my thing here, do the energy work that I do. I think the other approaches that I use, particularly the cognitive, intellectual, and emotional approaches that I use, are a little easier for people to get familiar with, feel comfortable with. But the energy work is still kind of new for a lot of folks. So what I thought I'd do tonight is address the question about a placebo. Is it real or is it just imaginary? And how do we know the difference? And does it even matter? And of course, I kind of answered that question in the introductory material that I sent you about the webinar, and also in the blog post that I had offered a link to people to read, because it really doesn't matter when you get right down to it. You don't have to believe in it. Even a negative attitude towards what's going on is not a detriment to the process. Things that are detrimental to the process are not really wanting to change. And holding on to the story of your life, the story of your unhappiness. I see a lot of cheering in the audience. That sounds very familiar. Those are things that are real impediments to changing. But doubting is not one of them. And so in a sense, when I ask the question, is it, it really doesn't matter whether you believe it or not. It works. It works even if you don't know what's going on. Now, when I work with adults, they always know what's going on. But sometimes it'll happen that a parent will want me to work on a child, for instance, and the child won't be present for the session. They don't even know what's happening or that anything's being done for them. And of course, when I work on them, I'm really working on the adult, but I'm working on the bond between the adult and the child. And when that shifts, and when the adult shifts, their energy shifts, then the child's energy shifts also. And sometimes rather dramatically. There's several examples I could cite where things happened with children that you'd have to say were inexplicable, because they weren't necessarily the things that the adults wanted to see differently. What they saw was a more even temperament, a softer way of speaking, and maybe much more affection, that kind of thing. And it was not necessarily the things that the adult had asked for. The adult might have wanted that the child would do their homework or clean up their room better, or just follow instructions better, mind better. And then what they got was actually a whole package. And that's not really surprising from this point of view, because this is holistic work. And when you shift energy patterns, you change the whole energy dynamic. And so when you soften things up and clean up the energy tangles, I use that word quite a bit. I think you've all heard that expression, energy tangles. Because when I look in, oftentimes what I see is something that looks like a ball of bits of yarn, just bits, and it's all messed up. It's all tangled up, and like a cat has gotten to it. Our cat would certainly do that, and it'd make quite a mess of the ball. And so oftentimes the energy looks like that to me. If I look at the chakras may be distorted. They may be very weak. There may be blocks in the chakras, blocks to the flow of energy within them, and that's a routine part of what I do. And it's a very effective part of changing the energy. Now, when we get to talking about is it a placebo, from my side, I see things, and when I say see, it's a kind of seeing, hearing, feeling, because we're not talking about concrete objects. We're talking about energy, and energy that's just, you might say, floating in space. It's kind of non-localized in space-time, and yet it is localized in space-time. How's that for a paradox? And but that's the nature of working at the quantum level. And again, in doing this energy work, one of the reasons I can work with people anywhere in the world is that all information is everywhere. And so that's another part of the seeming paradox. People who are familiar with quantum mechanics know that that's one of the fundamental principles. And it's the principle of a hologram, for instance, that all the information is contained in all the parts. And all you need to do is examine one part and you can get the whole. And so when I do this work, all I need is a, you might say, permission to get in contact with somebody's energy field. They ask me a question or they tell me something, which is in itself a question. And then that gives me a connection to their energy field. And it's, as I say, seeing, hearing, feeling kind of thing. It's just it's quite delicate, actually. And one has to be very innocent in doing this kind of work, meaning you can't bring your own expectations to it. And you never know what's going to show up. And the reason I say that kind of thing is that a lot of people work with chakras and auras and various layers of the auras. And the way I was trained was to be open to whatever shows up anywhere. And sometimes things show up behind me or way behind the person that I'm dealing with in terms of the physical bodies, or off to one side or the other, or above and below. And so it's a global kind of looking that one is doing. You have to be completely open to wherever the energy pattern shows up, and then be completely innocent about it, because if you have any kind of expectations, you shape the wave function of their energy, and so you kind of get what you expect. But if you go in with no expectations, then that energy pattern can show you what it needs to show you to allow you to operate, to work with, and change those things. Now, changing chakras, again, was something I was taught, but then lots of innovation has come along since then. There are various things that I can do just by having my attention and intention on what I'm observing. And sometimes I'll play with my hands a little bit just to kind of as if physically represent manipulating a chakra. For instance, all kinds of twisted is a very common thing that I see in serious problems. When people have serious problems, the energy, the chakras are often very convoluted. And so I kind of imagine that I'm straightening them out with my hands. Let's see if I can get my hands to show on the screen. Yeah, like that. And I'll go like that and kind of untwist them and untorque them and get them aligned. And then one of the tricks I was taught was simply to allow your attention to sweep through the chakra in and out. That is, the chakras are, you may have seen representations, they're like funnels. And so like you have a funnel coming out like that and, from a person. And so you can go in the funnel and go through it out the back and come back through. And just doing that, using that attention with intention that it should function normally, has a very profound effect, and the chakras will usually straighten out very quickly. Sometimes they won't. Sometimes particularly if there's a block inside, or it's been a long-standing problem, or it's part of a great karma that the person is working through, those kind of things can take some time to straighten out. And sometimes I'll work with them for a while and get the sense that we've done enough for this session, but we'll need another session or two to come back to them. and to continue the work to getting them straightened out. From my side, it really isn't work. I don't have to work hard. It's just kind of playing with what shows up. And playing is a very nice word for this. I really like that expression because a sense of playfulness is very important. It conveys a sense of innocence, a sense of non-expectation, not holding any expectations for how things should go. And so that allows one to see what's there, and anything can show up. Sometimes things show up in what I might call symbolic form, meaning not to be taken literally, but still there's something there, and we just work with whatever shows up, and then things will transform. Through matrix energetics, I've learned a vast array of tools and techniques. And then I've come across many other things that have been introduced to me through friends or from reading or emails I get. I get emails all the time, more than I can possibly read, from different people who do different things. And I've incorporated many of those things into my practice. I do quite a bit now with crystals, not physical crystals. Well, they once were physical crystals. I have the idea, the energy of that, we could say understanding, but it's in an energy form. And so when I'm working on someone, I can say, what crystal should we use crystals? I get a sense that yes, crystals will be good here. What color? And then the colors appear that I need to use, and then where to place them. And I just am shown where to place them. That's actually not a new skill. That is, the where to place them isn't a new skill. More than, it must have been about 2 decades ago, I discovered that I had quite a sensitivity to people's energy without really knowing what it was. Didn't have much understanding of it in those days. And I could do things by just either touching or just putting my attention on a spot or set of spots on a person's body. And I had no idea. I later learned that those were either marma points or points on the energy meridians that are used in traditional Chinese medicine. And so I didn't have any protocols, any real knowledge, whether it was kidney or spleen energy or whatever. It didn't matter. And that innocence actually was very valuable because it just allowed me to this needs attention. And so I could work on that, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then so a pattern would emerge. And I didn't have to analyze the meaning or have any understanding of what it was going to do, because that way I had no expectations, no anticipation of what was going to happen. I just put my attention on it, and then I get a sense that, yes, this was done, usually just within seconds or a very short period of time, and we would be done. So that's pretty much how I do it, and why I know that it isn't placebo. I mean, clearly we see effects, but in my work, it's pretty obvious to me what's going on the energy level. Even when I'm doing things that you might say were just emotionally based. A person comes in and they say they're very sad. And, in my awareness, I go like, where's that sadness? Oh yeah, it's located in some sort of place. Pardon me, I just kicked my computer stand. And so there's that sadness, and then what do we do with it? And so I just see what should be done with it. It just comes to me. Meanwhile, the person's telling me their story, and I'll pick up on one or two things. Oh, it's about a relationship with this or that, or maybe it's a past life. Let's check in. Is this a familial pattern? Is this coming from some other dimensions or parallel universes? Parallel universes are quite fun because there was a movie, Sliding Doors, it is called. It's still, you can buy the DVD or probably get it on one of the services, the streaming services. And the idea of Sliding Doors is that it follows a person's life in parallel, two parallel things. They're racing to get on a subway train, and then it follows them. If they get on the train, what happens in their life? If they don't get on the train, what happens in their life? And so the parallel lives of this person are played out. And eventually, and this is a really important principle, eventually the two have to come back together again. And so parallel universes, which can be multiple levels, um, are a very common thing to run into. And so I always check with that. Now, that's a bit of a cognitive function, meaning I have to think about, oh, is this parallel universe? Is past life? Is this an ancestral problem, a familial problem like that? And so I may get a whole set of bits of information about all of those things, but I don't have to know what happened in a past life. Now, I know that some workers are very sharp about telling people, sharp in the sense of their perception, and tell people what was going on and why they're the way they are. I actually, the way my guides are guiding me, it's better usually not to know. And the reason it's better is that if I say, oh, in some past life, some horrible thing happened, then the person is dwelling on that. They actually enliven that energy in this lifetime. That doesn't mean they're going to do the same thing, but the feeling of it is there. The energy of it gets brought in. Whereas if I just work on it without telling them what I'm working on, or even knowing myself what I'm working on. Now, sometimes I do know. It's often very clear, and I'll work on it. But if I tell people, it's usually like, oh, I cleaned up something about, you had a relationship problem, 3 lifetimes or 5 lifetimes or 6 lifetimes back. And I don't really go into details about it because I don't want them to hold on to that in this lifetime. It can be unhelpful in the process of bringing about transformation of energy. So we avoid that kind of thing. So let's see, I had one more point I wanted to make about the placebo effect. The placebo effect, of course, I'm assuming everybody knows what it means, really. It was discovered long ago that if you give somebody or do something to somebody, tell them that it's going to work. It'll work in a large percentage of cases. And it varies in the particular kind of thing that you're working on. But numbers like 25 to 35% are not at all unusual, depending on circumstances. And if you're running, for instance, supposing you're testing a pharmaceutical, a drug, and so you give them a drug and then you give somebody else a pill. They call it a sugar pill, meaning a pill that they do not expect to have any of the specific benefits that they're hoping that the pill that they are working with will have. And if you have a pill, say, that will work 65% of the time, but 35% of the time, 65% is measured, and 35% of the people who got the sugar pill get better, that means you've only got a 30% effect rate for the pill, because the other 35% can be accounted for by the placebo effect. So this kind of a confound in doing scientific research is very well understood. Less understood are other phenomenon. One is known as the conditioning effect. If you run an experiment in a laboratory, and it doesn't have to be a lab type laboratory, if you're doing an experiment with a pill and the people come and they get their pill from the nurse or whoever is distributing them each day, the effect of doing that in that space produces an increasing effect. That is, the longer you do that, the stronger the effect is of producing the expected or desired outcome. And that's been very apparent to me, for instance, working in this house, which is what we call a vastu. It's built according to the principles of Maharshi Stapachived. It's a very powerful building. The energy here is absolutely fabulous. It's one of the best vastus I've ever been in. And what I've discovered in doing the work here over the last 2 years is that the power of the environment has increased, and has, so that responses in people occur much faster, even if the people aren't here. Just my being here, working in this environment, if I'm connecting with them as I'm connecting with you now through the webinar or by phone, no matter, just being in this vastu, I immediately settle into that space where I can perceive what I need to perceive and do the work that needs to be done. So the conditioning effect is another one of those phenomenon that makes science difficult, but is a great joy when you're doing the kind of work that I'm doing, because it facilitates it so very nicely. So the placebo effect is advantageous even in and of itself. That is, if people do have the expectation that they're going to get better, that whatever they want to see change will change, then that's what's going to happen. So it's a very powerful thing. It's a very wonderful thing, but it's all connected to the energy that's underlying who we are, our body, our mind, our emotions, our sense of being. All of that is intimately connected. And so expectation is helpful. Negative expectation, interestingly, as I said at the beginning, doesn't have that big an effect. There are other things that have much bigger effects, as I outlined. Things like not really wanting to change or being very much afraid of change, things like that have a much greater effect than simply doubting. I can live with doubt, and I can help people overcome doubt. Doubt sometimes arises when we do a session and people do not notice much of anything. Sometimes they'll just give me the comment, and it's very, very common. They'll say, that was really deep. That was deepest like meditation I've ever had. And that's a very common thing for people to say to me. But they may say, but I didn't notice anything specific. And my answer to that is, that's just fine, because what I saw changing on the energy level will reflect in their life, usually within a day or two. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time. Sometimes it's almost instantaneous. If I'm working with pain, for instance, many times the pain will be gone at the end of the session. That would be very typical. Or it may end within a couple of hours. It just depends on how serious the injury is that's producing the pain, or the condition that's producing the pain. And particularly with chronic conditions, it can take longer to change. But some changes do take 2-3 days to appear, to manifest. And then many times I'll get an email or a phone call, or the next session will come up and they'll say, boy, I felt so good after that last session. I wasn't so sure about it when I left, but over the course of the next day or two, I really noticed, that whatever it was that was of concern to them was much better. So that's a very typical kind of story that I get about that. So the not having experience at the time of the session is, again, it creates some doubt in people, but it is not a deterrent to producing desired effects. So with that, I see if there are any questions. I invite people to use the chat function on the video. Those who have phoned in, I don't think there's any way for you to chat because you're automatically muted. Sorry about that. But those who are on video, if you use the chat function, it should appear in front of me. I have my chat panel open. And so you can click, my menu appears at the bottom of the screen. I assume it's like that for everybody. And it's over towards the right there. It says chat, and there's a little bubble. So you can chat. Does anybody here have any question or comment? So I'll wait for just a few more seconds to see if anything appears on my screen. We have a little smaller group this time, so don't hesitate to chat up, because you're not, what should we say, usurping other people's opportunity, because it's vacation time and many people are not here. Okay, well, if anything else pops up later, we'll get to it at the end of the group clearing session, but I'm going to move into that now.